What if religion doesn't make you free? What if it leaves you more confused, more anxious, more unstable? Because that's exactly what we are seeing today. More freedom than ever before, more choice than ever before, more self-expression than ever before, and yet more confusion. So here is the real question. What happens to human beings when nothing higher guides them? Because today we are told something constantly, that religion restricts, that religion limits, that religion holds you back. But what if the opposite is true? What if without guidance, the human being doesn't become free, but fragmented? And in this episode, we are going to explore something deeper, not just whether religion is necessary, but whether the human being can actually function without it. Assalamu alaikum, and welcome back to Reflection, where we explore the wisdom of the Qur'an through the lens of Tafsīr al-Mīzān by ʿAllāmah Muhammad Hussein Ṭabāṭabāʻī. In recent episodes, we reflected on the honor of the human being, on the idea that every soul has a guide, and on the possibility of real moral transformation. But that naturally leads us to a deeper question. If human beings are capable of choosing, capable of shaping their own lives, then why do we need religion at all? Why do we need something beyond ourselves to tell us what is true, what is right, and how to live? Because at first, the idea of not needing religion feels empowering. To decide for yourself, to define your own values, to shape your own path. But if we look more closely, something doesn't quite hold, because the more we try to define everything on our own, the less stable those definitions become. And slowly, what felt like freedom begins to feel like uncertainty. In this episode of Reflection, we will explore why human beings cannot fully define truth on their own, how freedom without guidance leads to inner conflict, the Quranic explanation of human division and guidance, and why religion is not control but alignment. There is a common assumption we rarely question, that disagreement is natural, that division is inevitable, that humanity has always been this fragmented. But if we pause and reflect, was it always like this? Or did something change? Because the Qur'an presents a very different picture. It describes a time when human beings were not divided in the way we see today, not fractured by competing ideologies, not pulled in opposing directions of truth and meaning. This insight is anchored in Surah al-Baqarah, Surah number 2, verse 213. وَكَانَ النَّاسُ ummatan wahidah. Mankind was but one community. This does not mean that human beings were perfect. It means something more subtle. There was simplicity, clarity, a shared orientation toward what is right. But as human beings developed intellectually, socially, materially, something began to shift. Desires expanded, interests began to compete, power became something to pursue, and slowly unity gave way to division. Not because truth disappeared, but human beings began to move away from it. And this is important because it suggests something deeper about the human condition. The division is not always a sign that truth is unclear, but sometimes a sign that we are. Pause for a moment. When people disagree, is it always because the truth is complicated, or is it sometimes because human beings are? We often assume that the more intelligent a person becomes, the closer they get to truth, that education leads to clarity, that knowledge leads to agreement, that progress leads to certainty. But if we look at the world honestly, we see something very different. The more advanced human beings become, the more they disagree, not less. More opinions, more perspectives, more conflicting versions of what is true. And that should make us pause, because it tells us something important, that intelligence alone does not resolve disagreement. Why? Because intelligence does not operate in isolation. It is influenced by desire, by ego, by fear, by ambition. Two intelligent people can look at the same reality and arrive at completely different conclusions. Not because the truth changed, but because what they wanted quietly shaped what they saw. And this is where the human problem begins. The issue is not a lack of intellect. The issue is that intellect does not always lead the human being. Very often, it serves them. It justifies what they already want. It defends what they are already inclined toward. It explains away what feels uncomfortable. And when that happens, truth is no longer something we discover. It becomes something we construct. And once truth becomes something we construct, it begins to shift from person to person, from moment to moment, from desire to desire. Consider this. If your understanding of truth is influenced by what you want, can you ever fully trust your own conclusions? Now, take this one step further. If every individual begins to define truth for themselves, then what happens to truth itself? It doesn't disappear, but it begins to shift. It becomes flexible, relative, and unstable. And when truth becomes unstable, everything built on top of it begins to shift with it. Justice becomes subjective, morality becomes negotiable, meaning becomes a matter of personal preference. And slowly, society begins to fracture because without a shared standard, there is nothing strong enough to hold human beings together. And this is not just a theoretical idea. This is the world we are increasingly living in. A world where people are told, define your own truth, create your own identity, decide your own values. At first, this feels liberating, but over time, it becomes exhausting because a life that must constantly redefine itself never fully settles. Because now, every individual is carrying a weight they were never designed to carry. The burden of answering questions that never fully settle. What is right? What is wrong? What is the purpose of my life? What should I live for? And when those answers depend entirely on you, they never become stable. They shift with your feelings, with your circumstances, with your desires. And that instability does not stay abstract. It begins to affect how you live. Your decisions hesitate, your convictions weaken, your direction becomes unclear. Because without a stable reference point, you're always adjusting, always rethinking, always redefining, and never fully arriving. Pause and reflect. If everything is open to interpretation, what actually anchors your life? At this point, the question becomes unavoidable. If human beings cannot fully stabilize truth on their own, then what resolves this? What provides a standard that does not shift, that does not bend to desire, that does not change with time or context? This is where the Qur'an does something remarkable. It does not begin by imposing rules. It begins by describing the human condition. It tells us that human beings were once unified and then they differed, and that difference was not left unresolved. It required something beyond them. This insight is anchored in Surah Al-Baqarah, Surah number 2, verse number 213. بَعَثَ اللَّهَ النَّبِيِّينَ مُبَشِّرِينَ وَمُنذِرِينَ. So Allah sent the prophets as bearers of good tidings and as warners. وَأَنزَلَ مَعَهُمُ الْكِتَابَ بِالْحَقِّ لِيَحْكُمَ بَيْنَ النَّاسِ. And He sent down with them the book in truth so that it may do what? So that it may judge between people concerning that in which they differed. This is a profound claim that human disagreement is not resolved by more opinions, but by something higher than opinion, not by multiplying perspectives, but by introducing a standard, a reference point that stands above human bias. Religion in this sense is not introduced as restriction, it is introduced as resolution, not to suppress the human being, but to guide them when their own capacities are no longer enough. And this reframes the entire question, because now the issue is not why does religion exist? The issue becomes what would happen if it didn't. Pause and think about this. If human beings could fully resolve truth on their own, why would revelation ever be necessary? One of the most common assumptions today is that religion exists to control human behavior, that it restricts freedom, that it limits expression, that it imposes boundaries on what we can do. But the Quranic perspective is far deeper than this. Religion is not about control. It is about alignment. Alignment between what is true, what we believe, and how we live. Because without that alignment, the human being begins to fracture internally. You want one thing, but you know another. You believe something, but you live differently. You recognize what is right, but struggle to act upon it consistently. And over time, that internal contradiction has a cost. It leaves a person knowing what is right, but unable to live it consistently. It weakens clarity, it drains conviction, it creates a quiet tension within the self, a sense that something is not fully settled, that you're not fully at rest with your own life. And this is where guidance becomes essential. Not to remove your freedom, but to stabilize it. To ensure that your desires do not override what is true. That your emotions do not distort your judgment. That your life does not drift without direction. As ʿAllāmah Ṭabāṭabāʻī explained in al-Mīzān, revelation provides an objective standard. Something that stands above individual bias, social pressure, and shifting cultural norms. Not to take away your ability to choose, but to guide what you choose toward. Because true freedom is not simply doing whatever you want. True freedom is becoming someone whose desires themselves are aligned with what is right. Someone for whom truth no longer feels like resistance, but like clarity. Pause for a moment. Is freedom the ability to follow every desire? Or is it the ability to no longer be ruled by them? But if guidance is so necessary, if it brings clarity, if it stabilizes the human being, then why is it so often resisted? Why do human beings push it away? The Qur'an answers this directly, and its answer is not what we might expect. This insight is anchored in Surah al-Baqarah, Surah number 2, verse 213. وَمَا اخْتَلَفَ فِيهِ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ أُوتُهُ بَغْيًا بَيْنَهُمْ. And none differed about it except those who were given it out of rebellion among themselves. This is not a problem of clarity. It's a problem of the self. Because truth often asks something difficult of us. To let go of ego, to restrain desire, to accept limits we did not choose. And not every human being is willing to do that. So instead of adjusting themselves to the truth, they adjust the truth to fit themselves. And once that happens, everything begins to shift again. Because now, truth is no longer something you submit to. It becomes something you reshape. And this is where fragmentation returns. Not because guidance was unclear, but because it was resisted. Consider this carefully. When you reject something, is it always because it is unclear? Or is it sometimes because it asks something of you that you are not ready to give? But if the problem is not clarity, if the issue is not that truth is unavailable, but that the human being resists it, then a deeper question emerges. Why do some people recognize the truth while others turn away from it? What makes the difference? The Qur'an does not leave this unanswered. The verse does not end with division. It ends with something more subtle, something more hopeful. This insight is once again anchored in Surah al-Baqarah, Surah number 2, verse number 213. فَهَدَى اللَّهَ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لِمَا اخْتَلَفُوا فِيهِ مِنَ الْحَقِّ بِإِذْنِهِ. So God guided those who believed to the truth concerning that over which they had deferred. This tells us something important about guidance. That it is not simply a matter of exposure. It is not just about hearing the message or understanding the argument or being presented with evidence. Because two people can encounter the same truth. One is moved by it, the other remains unchanged. One sees clarity, the other sees inconvenience. And the difference is not always intellectual. It is something deeper. Guidance is not just something you observe. It is something you receive. An inner opening by which truth is not only understood but accepted. As ʿAllāmah Ṭabāṭabāʻī explained in al-Mizan, divine guidance is connected to sincerity, to a genuine willingness to seek truth even when it is uncomfortable, even when it challenges what you prefer, even when it asks you to change. Because truth does not only inform you, it transforms you, but only if you allow it. And this introduces a powerful responsibility that guidance is not entirely outside of you. It responds to something within you, your openness, your honesty, your willingness to submit to what is real. Pause and reflect. If the truth became clear to you, would you follow it even if it cost you something? So, if guidance is not just something you understand, but something you receive, if it begins as an inner alignment, then what does it actually do to your life? What does it change in the way you move, the way you decide, the way you live? ʿAllāmah Ṭabāṭabāʻī offers a powerful way to understand this in al-Mīzān. He describes human life as a journey, a movement toward a destination. And if we think about it carefully, no one questions that a journey requires direction. No one assumes that traveling without a map leads to success. And yet, when it comes to life itself, we often assume we can navigate it alone. We move, we act, we make decisions, we pursue goals, and from the outside, it can look like progress. But movement is not the same as direction. A person can be busy and still be lost, productive and still be lost, even successful and still be lost. Because without a clear destination and without a reliable way to reach it, progress becomes uncertain. And this is where religion must be understood differently. Not as a burden placed on the human being, but as the map given to them. A map that clarifies where you are, where you're going, and what leads you there. Because without it, you may experience life, you may explore, you may feel moments of meaning, but you do not know if you're moving in the right direction. You're constantly adjusting, re-evaluating, second-guessing, never fully certain. With it, your movement gains purpose, your choices gain clarity, your direction becomes steady, and life begins to feel anchored. Why? Because now you're not just moving, you're moving towards something real, towards something that does not shift with your mood or your circumstances or your desires. And that changes everything. Pause and reflect. Is the problem that religion limits you, or that without it, you do not know where you are going? So when we return to the original question, we begin to see that it was never just about religion. It was about the human being, about how we understand truth, how we make decisions, and how we live with direction. Because without something higher to guide us, we do not simply become free, we become uncertain. And once we begin to see that clearly, the question is no longer abstract, it becomes personal. It becomes something we have to answer in the way we live. So before we close, let us pause and gather what we have explored today. First, human beings were not created to generate truth from themselves. We were created to recognize it, to receive it, and to live by it. Without a higher standard, truth becomes unstable and life begins to fragment. Second, intelligence alone is not enough because the human mind does not operate in isolation. It is shaped by desire, influenced by ego, and pulled by emotion. And without guidance, even intelligence can lead us away from what is true. Third, religion is not restriction, it is alignment. It brings coherence to the self, stability to the heart, and direction to life, not by removing freedom, but by guiding it. Fourth, guidance is not just something you hear, it is something you are willing to accept. And that acceptance depends on sincerity, on whether you're willing to follow the truth, even when it asks something difficult of you. Finally, if this reflection resonated with you, take a moment to pause and ask yourself honestly, what is guiding my life? If you found this episode valuable, consider subscribing and sharing so these reflections can reach others who are searching for clarity. And in our next episode, we take this one step further. If human beings need guidance, if truth cannot be left entirely to us, then a deeper question emerges. Why would God send prophets? Why not simply give human beings intellect and leave them to figure things out on their own? What is it about the human condition that makes prophethood necessary? This is what we will explore next. Until next week, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.